See how Tanium can feed ServiceNow CMDB with fresh asset inventory on today's Tanium Tech Talk. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone, and welcome to our series on integrations with ServiceNow. And we're going to start at the beginning with asset data, hardware, software, usage, all that good stuff. And so, folks, today what we want to do is we literally want to go step by step. How do I get this stuff from Tanium into ServiceNow really fast? And Brandon's our guy. So Brandon, where would you start with this whole process of connecting these two systems?
I'll preface before getting into this that there are two ways that we can get this data into ServiceNow. The preferred option is using what is referred to as a service graph connector. So this is an integration that is built and maintained by ServiceNow. It does require that an organization has ITAM and ServiceNow, which is often bundled with ServiceNow Discovery. So if you have ServiceNow Discovery, if you have ITAM, Service Graph Connector is going to be the way to go. But either way that we start, the reason I'm on the help page here is I want to show where we can actually find information that you can follow along within our help page. I'm just going to navigate here on APIs and integrations, come into ServiceNow. And if we scroll down here, we'll see our IT asset management for ServiceNow. And if we click on this run book, everything that I'm going to be showing today, whether you're setting up the pull integration, which is the service graph connector, or the push integration, which is directly from Tanium asset, you will have step-by-step how to go through that process located within our help page. Whether we're using the push or the pull integration, the Tanium push or the service graph connector, we're going to need a view in asset. And that's the way that we actually decide what data do we want to send to ServiceNow, how do we want that to look, what computers do we want to send. So if I come into our modules and I select asset, I'm going to come over here to views. And in this environment, I have already created a ServiceNow view. If you are doing this for the first time though, when you see this create view button, and if you were to click on it, one of the options would be to create a ServiceNow view. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a view that we call ServiceNow Reserved. And we can see that on this view, the label is reserved, and I actually have limited options as far as being able to modify this. And this view is always going to be our recommended out-of-the-box configuration as far as the different attributes that you want to send to ServiceNow. If you want to make changes, if you want to send anything different, or even going through this process, what you would do is you would come to this reserved view, and then we're going to create a copy. So I will call this ServiceNow, and we'll say asset push. And on the description, we can go ahead and say asset push integration. And as I'd mentioned, we already have a number of columns that are pre-selected. So these are all of the different hardware attributes, the network adapters, the disk systems, the files, everything that we recommend that is already pre-mapped to ServiceNow. So any of these attributes that are selected, you're not going to have to do any kind of customization. You could just use this out of the box, and it's going to get you a ton of hardware data immediately. Once we've come through, again, if I wanted to filter any of these attributes based on specific systems or based on network adapters, I have the ability to say, okay, out of all the different devices, here's what I want to send. But again, you can just use this completely out of the box. I'm not going to make any changes to this. And the preferred option for most of our customers is we can pull data directly from Tanium by leveraging what is called the Service Graph Connector. So the Service Graph Connector for Tanium. There's a few ways that we can get the Service Graph Connector. It is built, owned, and maintained by ServiceNow. So you always have the option. One, we can go to something like the ServiceNow store. So here's the ServiceNow store. What I've done, you can see up at the top, is I have just searched for Tanium, and we can see the Tanium integrations that we have published with our Tanium logo. But there's also this Service Graph Connector for Tanium. So if I wanted to install this in my environment, I can go directly here to this Service Graph Connector for Tanium. hit the Get button, and then there's going to ask me what environment do I want to install in. The other way that you can get this Service Graph connector is directly from within ServiceNow. If I were to just type plugins and then search for Tanium here, and this is going to show, we can see I have one installed. And this is, I actually just went through and installed this. It took about 15 minutes in this personal developer instance. Again, depending on your environment, depending on the time of day, this could take upwards of an hour. So I've already gone through the installation process. That is the only thing that I have done, though. We have not touched any part of the actual Service Graph connector yet. The process of installing the Service Graph connector is about 30 seconds. Whether you go from the store, whether you go from the plugins, you click on it, you click the install button, you hit confirm, and then it does its thing. The actual configuration of the Service Graph connector, that's typically about an hour-long call, hour-long session, just to ensure that step-by-step everything is working properly. The one thing is, on the Service Graph connector or with any of these integrations, there may be specific requirements on either the Tanium side or the ServiceNow side from a module perspective. So if you do not see the Service Graph connector, or you do not have the ability to install the Service Graph connector, it may be an entitlement thing within your organization that you don't have ServiceNow Discovery or ITAM, for example. This is the great thing. We're going to walk through this step by step, but if I type Service Graph connector and I come into Tanium and hit setup, what we have done is we have worked with ServiceNow to create a step-by-step guided setup in order to configure this. So again, the configuration is going to primarily be done from within ServiceNow. And the first thing we need to do is hit get started. So as part of the configuration today, what we're going to be focused on is this first section here to configure the connection and credentials. And I say this first section here because the next two sections are going to be completely optional, and they're going to be based on your individual needs. So if you have multiple Tanium instances that you want to connect to a single ServiceNow instance, for example, maybe a MSP provider, you have the ability to connect multiple Tanium instances through this Service Graph connector. Or if you want to bring in additional information for AIX and Solaris platform devices, you have the ability to configure that here in the advanced section. But in order for most customers, what you're going to need to be concerned with is just this first section. And so we can see there are 0 out of 7 tasks that are completed. And we're just going to walk through each of these. But the great thing is, at every step, it is actually going to guide us through exactly what we need to do to configure the Service Graph connector and start pulling data from Tanium into ServiceNow. So the first step here is set the authentication type. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to hit configure, and you have two options. So one thing we'll note here, and you may run into this, is these options are currently grayed out. And I have this warning here saying that the record is in the Service Graph connector for Tanium application, but global is the current application. So if I want to, I can just click here and it's going to switch, or I can come up here to the application scope. And I'm going to actually come in and let's select Tanium, and we'll say Service Graph connector for Tanium. So now that I have switched into the proper application scope, I have the ability to come in and modify the settings within the Service Graph connector guided setup. This first step, the two things that we have an option are, when we authenticate to Tanium, do we want to authenticate using basic authentication, so using a username and password, or do we want to authenticate using an API token? For this purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to authenticate with that API token. And I'm going to authenticate with that API token because I want to walk through the process of actually generating an API token using that persona that we created that had the least privileges required on the Tanium side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch from basic, and I'm just going to write token. And we can see here the choices are basic and token. We have a description about this. So lowercase token, and I'm just going to hit update. And now that we have set the authentication property value field to token, I'm going to go ahead and mark this as complete. So we have already done nearly 15% of the entire configuration, and all I had to do was write the word token. The next part is configure the token auth credentials. This is going to ask me what is the API key that I'm going to use to authenticate with Tanium. So in order to do this, what I'm going to come into is my Tanium environment. And what I'm going to do is in Tanium, as a Tanium admin, I'm going to create a persona. I can generate a token, again, using a persona that has the least privileges that are required for me to complete this integration. So from Tanium, I'm going to come over to administration, and I'm going to select personas. And I'm going to create a new persona, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call this ServiceNow least privilege. And we'll say ServiceNow asset integration. And as part of this, there are 3 roles that we need to add to this persona. So the first role that we're going to add in here is going to be interact basic user. The next role that we're going to add in here is going to be asset report reader. And the last role that we're going to add is going to be gateway user. So these 3 permissions, we can see 3 selected here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And the last thing that I want to do is in creating this persona, I want to ensure that we're going to have access to the devices that we need. So I'm going to come into our computer groups, and I'm going to click on manage computer groups. And for this, I'm going to select all computers. So you may want to test with a specific subset of computers or specific computer groups. For this purpose, though, I'm going to bring in everything that Tanium has access to. So I'm going to select all computers. And last, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add this persona to any users I want to be able to access this persona. So this may just be your Tanium admin who's doing the configuration of this integration on the Tanium side. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to actually select myself. And now I can go ahead and save this persona. May need to refresh to bring this up. There we go. So instead of my default persona, I can now choose this ServiceNow least privilege. And I'm going to select this when I want to generate an API token so that when I generate that token, the token only has access to the persona that I'm using. So if I'm a system admin and I just go in and I generate an API token, it's going to give access to everything a system admin has access to. But if I generate a token using a persona, it's only going to give access to whatever that persona has. So just those 3 minimal permissions that were required on the Tanium side as part of this integration.
So this is a persona for just the integration, but as a Tanium administrator, it's not giving me anything else I didn't have before, but it's limiting my scope of permissions so that when I create the token, it doesn't give away too much.
And I'm going to come to administration and select API tokens. And I'm going to create a new API token. So we'll call this one ServiceNow Service Graph Connector. For purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to leave the expiration at 7 days. We will recycle the tokens. So you could set this to 7 days. You could set it to 30 days. Very commonly, I'll see customers that will set this to 365 days. I'm just going to leave this as default. But the important thing is I'm going to come in and I'm going to select this persona that we created before. So this had just those 3 roles in Tanium that allow me to use the API gateway, allow me to read the asset views, and allow me to interact with devices. And then in the trusted IP addresses, for purposes only of this demonstration, I'm going to accept all IP addresses. So the way I do that is 0.0.0.0/0. In your instance in ServiceNow, you would likely want to ensure that you are only accepting connections. And on the Tanium side, you're only sending to things that are approved. So this would be something you would want to talk within your organization about whitelisting IPs, about where we're actually going to accept data from. But the trusted IP address is going to be specific to your environment, and it's going to be what are the addresses in ServiceNow that we want to be able to accept using this API token. I'm going to go ahead and again, just generate this token. And for this demo purpose in my personal developer instance, I'm going to allow it to accept any of the IP addresses. and we'll hit create on here. And what I need to do now is I'm going to copy this token. One thing that is very important is this token is only going to be visible for 5 minutes. So if you miss this token, if you copy it and you don't paste it into a notepad, if you lose this token and 5 minutes is up, you are going to need to regenerate a new token.
And like you said earlier, the the renewal of that token is automatic.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
As long as that user is still active on the Tanium side, we'll continue to rotate that token. So now what I can do is I'm going to come in here and it asked me for my API key. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste my API key and I'm going to hit update. And we can now mark this as complete. So now the next thing that we need to do is we are going to configure the actual connection. One thing to note here, and in fact, we have this as note within the guided setup. This particular step is going to depend on if you are using Tanium Cloud or if you are on-prem. And if you are on-prem, you are going to need to go through the mid-server connection options that are going to be within this step. If you are using Tanium Cloud, you do not need to worry about any of the mid-server setup. And I'm going to hit configure. And we can leave this name, the credentials, the credential alias. All of this can just be left exactly how it is. And again, if you are using a mid-server, you'll need to check this, and then you can start to enter the information for your specific Tanium mid-server. But I'm connecting to a Tanium Cloud environment, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to uncheck this use mid-server. We're going to leave the protocol as HTTPS, and on the host, the address for our Tanium Cloud instance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to remove the HTTPS because we've already specified this in the protocol. And I'm going to just remove this / at the end. And what we need in a Tanium Cloud environment is I'm going to add -API before we get to the .cloud.tanium.com. So whatever your Tanium URL is for your Tanium instance, you are going to add -API before the .cloud.tanium.com. And now I just need to go ahead and hit update and we can come back into our setup. Okay, so now we are back here and I've done this step. So we've configured the connection. We've put in our proper URL. We've added the -API before the .cloud.tanium. And I'm going to go ahead and mark this as complete.
Boy, this has just a nice flow to it. All the directions are right there. It takes you right where you need to go in the console. This is nice.
Yeah, and the great thing is at any of these, there are notes in here for common issues that you may run into. We also have those documented within the help page, but this literally guides you through every field that you need to modify, any fields you don't need to modify, anything that is optional. We have tried to make this as easy as possible. And this is, again, built and published by ServiceNow. So we work really, really closely with ServiceNow to ensure that this is as easy to manage, as easy to configure as possible.
I think I just heard some users cheering as they're watching the video.
Well, the nice thing is, too, based on everything we've done, we're actually one step ahead of the game. So the next part on here is configure the view. And if you had not gone through the initial part of this video where we went into Tanium assets and we configured our view, we used the ServiceNow reserved and we copied that and created our own view, this will walk you through exactly what you need to do in order to create that view. But because we've done that, I'm just going to come into configure. And the first thing that this is going to do is it's going to connect to Tanium, and it's going to pull up our views. And now, one thing I want to note here is when I clicked on this, I have not done any test configuration. I haven't gone through any processes. This automatically just pulled in the Tanium views. If you get to this step, though, and it says we cannot find any views or there is an error, it is because when it pulled these views, it checked using the authentication credentials, using the API token, using that URL for your Tanium instance. So if it was unable to connect to Tanium using everything that was provided, it's going to have an error when you go to select this view. So if you get to this step where you need to select the view, and I'm going to go ahead and select the view that we had actually created, and you run into an error here, the only thing that we have done so far is we have put in the API token. You can go and check and make sure that you copy that API token. And API tokens do have token with a couple hyphens in front of them. So sometimes people may not copy the full API token. It could be that as part of setting up that persona in Tanium, there may have been an issue with improperly setting the specific roles for that persona. Or very commonly, it could be when we were actually putting in the Tanium instance URL, we forgot to add API. Or maybe we accidentally didn't delete the HTTPS, and so it is now double added the HTTPS. So if you get to step 4 and it cannot pull the views, something has had an error with either the credentials or the connection to the Tanium environment. So I'm going to click Set View, and we'll come back and again, look and see exactly what we were at. So coming back into the setup, we were able to select that view. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that as complete. So now when we come back here, we are more than 50% of the way done. So we have configured our view, we've configured the connection. This next step for the ADM setup instructions, this does not need to be used. So I'm going to actually go ahead and for this ADM instructions, I'm just going to click skip on here. And last thing is we need to come in and we're just going to test the connection. So I'm going to come into configure. We have our API token, we have our URL, we have our view. And what this is going to do is it's going to try and grab about 20 records and just make sure that everything worked properly. So we could see in here, actually in this situation, the completion was success, but we canceled because it was actually going to try and send too much information on here. So as part of this test, actually, we're seeing in here conflicting information. Our state is canceled, but we have a completion code of success, and we have an error message here saying our response equals or exceeds the limit. Again, this is a brand new personal developer instance. So everything in here is minimized compared to what you would get in a production environment or in a sub-prod environment. There's a couple ways to get around this. One, if you do run into any issue with this, you can always open a support ticket, which is typically the easiest with ServiceNow, and they can increase this limit for you. The other way that you can do this, if you were a ServiceNow admin, you could come into the actual properties for this table that's specified in any error here, and you could increase the max size of this. So this is telling me the max size that's allowed, which is 5 megs. We're trying to send 10 megs of data. So again, if you're working in a production instance or you're working in a sub-prod instance, you likely are never going to encounter this. If you're working in a developer instance where some of these limits are reduced, you can update those yourself within the table or open a ticket with ServiceNow and they can increase that size limit for you. But the completion code success, even though we didn't send data as part of this test connection, we did validate that this is actually working. So the view is proper, the API token is proper, the Tanium instance is proper. If we were to come in, we can go ahead and mark this as complete. It does note in here as well, if you get any errors in here, error messages, it'll indicate how you can actually troubleshoot this. Now that we have our connection established, we verified that the connection is going to work. We have selected the view that we created in Tanium, and that's the view of the data that we're going to be bringing in here. The last step is to come in and schedule the import. If we come in here and we go to configure, there's 2 different things that we're bringing in here. So first, we're going to bring in the hardware and software, and then we're going to bring in any sort of application data around this. And the application is going to run after the parent runs, so after this hardware and software. So I'm going to come into this hardware and software. And again, this is a brand new developer instance. This is a completely fresh installation of the Service Graph connector. So this is how the Service Graph connector is going to look by default. The run period is going to be set to periodically. So this is going to run at least once a day. Depending on how your environment is going, it may run more than once. So it could update multiple times, and ServiceNow is going to control, okay, how often do we need to get new data? Is anybody else using ServiceNow? Are there other operations that we want to let this run at the background? Or we could come in and we could, for example, schedule this to run daily, or we could schedule this to run monthly or weekly. Periodically is going to be the number one option, just for the out-of-the-box configuration. This will make sure that at least daily, we are going to be updating all of the records in the CMDB. So all we would need to do is we would need to check and activate this. Once we activate this, we can see that the default option is we're going to run every day. So if I wanted to actually change this on the periodically, I could come in and we'll say, let's run every 8 hours. This service graph connector is going to come in and it's going to grab from the Tanium hardware and software tables. And then after that, for any sort of additional software data or application data, it will run after this job runs. So this is all we need to do here is we have activated this. We can see all of the different scripts that are done by default. If you're a ServiceNow admin, you have all the different items in here if you wanted to set conditional runs or if you wanted to increase the size limit, but I'm just going to keep this exactly how ServiceNow recommends. Hit update now. And if we want to, we could then come back and I'm going to hit execute now. So this job is now going to be running. If we look back at our Tanium applications, I had not activated it yet. So if we wanted this to run as well, we would need to go ahead and set this to be active. So by default, even though we've done the configuration, even though we've done the test connection, you still need to come into this last step and you need to activate the schedule on these items. So I'll go ahead and activate this. And now we have these jobs that are starting to run. So as soon as we activated that, it's going to run. And in another 8 hours, it's going to run again. And the data that we are bringing in through this service graph connector is going to map exactly what ServiceNow wants out of the box. So either way that you are sending this data, we're going to be mapping to your file systems. We're going to be mapping to the network adapters. We're going to be mapping to the computer tables. All of the attributes are going to be mapping to the same place. So no matter which way you are sending the data into ServiceNow, whether you're pushing it from Tanium or you're pulling, all of it is going to be in the expected tables and the expected fields within the CMDB that ServiceNow wants.
Right.
So now
we want to go see what does it look like in ServiceNow to refresh a view of no assets and have data.
Yeah, so we're going to come into this fresh environment and I'm just going to go ahead and let's look at the computers table. So I'm just going to come in and select computer. And we can start to see that there are already more than 1,000 different devices. So if I wanted to actually take this a little bit further, what I can do is let's go ahead and we're going to add our discovery source. Maybe some demo data that's in here that ServiceNow includes. So we're going to filter this for Tanium.
I was just going to point out, I saw Windows 98 and Windows XP in the list. We want to make sure people don't think that's coming from Tanium. That's just default.
Exactly. So Tanium, I mean, anytime we refresh this number is going to be coming up. But whether you're an environment that has 1,000 devices or 1 million devices, it's going to be very, very quick, quicker than any other integration in the CMDB. And as part of this, as I had mentioned, if we were to come in here and let's click onto a specific endpoint that we have in here. So we're going to select a specific computer record. And I noted we're not just throwing everything directly onto the computer table. So we have information about the actual hardware. We've got information around serial number and tags that are in here, everything that Tanium was sending. But when we come and look at things like network adapters or storage devices or file systems, or even this software installation, we're bringing in this software installation data by default. And each of these are now created as a configuration item record. So our file systems, our storage devices, our network adapters, these are now new records in the CMDB that have a relationship to this Linux server in this example that's on the computer table.
Let's go ahead and look at a Windows box as well, just for comparison. It's nice to see the Linux, all those details in there, and I'm sure a Windows box is going to look a little different.
Yeah, and one thing to note here, as we saw when we were actually creating this view and creating the destinations, there were a ton of attributes that were pre-selected. So again, this is a brand new personal developer instance in ServiceNow, which means a lot of the attributes that you may have in your instance are simply not on this view right now. So this is a very condensed view and does not include anywhere near all of the attributes that we are sending to the computer table, for example. But one thing to note, coming into this is disk space on the computer table, we're showing nothing. And the reason is you may have multiple disks. So in this specific example, if we were to come and look here, we have 2 different disks in here. And we have multiple file systems. So there's a C drive and there's a D drive, and we've got another system that's mounted in here. And so disk space isn't really relevant when we want to understand the health of a machine. Here we can actually look at the exact storage devices, the exact file systems, how much is in use and how much is free on an individual basis. And then these are all connected to this Windows server.
And that's a good example of something that would change on a more frequent basis. And maybe it would be worthwhile to have updated multiple times per day if you're monitoring and alerting on low disk usage.
Absolutely. The usage, the amount of free space, even your software inventory and software usage data, that's something that is really beneficial to have updated multiple times a day. Processor, your CPU speed, that's something that likely isn't going to be changing several times throughout the day.
Maybe it's worth looking at here is like if we pull up a hardware asset, Windows particularly, can we look at the installed applications relationship data there?
Yeah, absolutely. So same place, we've got the network adapters, the storage devices, the file systems on here. I can come into the software installed, and we are, again, bringing each of these in exactly how it's coming from Tanium, exactly how ServiceNow is going to expect it. You can see here on the name side, that has the name of the machine. So we're getting information about the specific installation record within this machine. And then here is the product. So if we were to come in to say this individual product, we can see all of the machines already that this is installed on.
And that's what I like about this truly related data as it comes in. You can pivot from either side. Could you, so we navigated from the menu through the computer side. Could you just do the same to navigate in from the software side, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into our software table instead. And everything that we're looking at is in the CMDB. So we talked about the CMDB at the beginning. There's so much information beyond just what is your hardware that is involved in the CMDB. So if we come into our software table, and let's go ahead and for this purpose, let's look at last updated, just so we can bring in the most recent stuff. Because again, this is a personal developer instance, so it's going to have information in here that ServiceNow just provides as demo information. But I can see in here, the different manufacturers of the software. I can go through my list. There's almost 12,000 individual pieces of software that have been brought into this environment. And so let's find one to pick on that's maybe we've got Ubuntu, we've got our Mac systems. We'll pick on Microsoft Edge here. So we can see, based on everything we've brought into the CMDB, this specific version of Microsoft Edge has been installed on 57 machines that are currently part of the CMDB. And if I want to go see that actual machine, all I need to do is click on from here, and now I'm in the computer table. So these relationships are so critical because you can trace back and forth the dependencies between the software, between the hardware, between your network devices, between the business services that are dependent on some of the software that's installed on here. And so it truly is a system of relationships between everything that makes up your entire infrastructure. When it comes to troubleshooting, whether you're using the push or the pull, there's very minimal areas in which things can go wrong. And again, that's, do I have the proper username and password? Do the users either on the ServiceNow or the Tanium side have the proper roles that are assigned to them? And am I connecting to the correct environments? Other than that, everything is already laid out of the box without you having to change or create tables or do any sort of advanced configuration. It's, do I have the right user? Do I have the right environment? And do I have the right persona or roles assigned to the users I'm using to authenticate?
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for this extended, thorough tour of configuring ServiceNow CMDB or ITAM integration for Tanium. Here's the benefit. Now you've got this video to go back and refer to some of the steps. You've got the guides that Brandon pointed out. Those links are in the show notes in the description below here on YouTube. And so you can check those guides out as well and try this on your own first. Most people, like you said, most people are able to be successful out of the box using these guides, and they don't even have to engage with support. So that's a benefit to you, so that you can get this going as fast as possible on your own timetable. And as always, we're always here to help, but we wanted to give you this information to empower you to serve yourself and get this going in your environment. So that's it, folks. That's how you can refresh your CMDB multiple times per day with Tanium. So keep an eye out. We're going to have more videos in this ServiceNow integration series, and connect with us on social media or talk to your account team if you'd like to dialogue further. Until next time, go Tanium.